What are you? You're a detective, a gender detective? Lifting up skirts and pulling down pants and just getting in there with your magnifying glass?
Our favorite infamous British TERF, Joanne Rowling, did it again, using her large platform and power to harass not one, but two cis female boxers for being too good at boxing during the Olympic Games, unleashing an international backlash where people felt entitled to dissect the bodies of those athletes, Imani Khalif from Algeria and Lee Yu-ting from Taiwan, just because they don't fit into what a woman is supposed to look like, according to people like Joanne. Of course, Joanne Rowling doesn't care about the child rapist who's participating in the Olympics because she's too busy dissecting and harassing two women of color who are competing in the Olympics because they don't pass her gender expectations. But this episode is not about the Patreon saint of TERFs or her problematic views about, among others, race, politics, she casually doing Holocaust revisionism, her friendly engagements with people like Elon Musk and accounts like Lips of TikTok and Mothers of Liberty, the fact that she doesn't think that Palestinian women are women, or that she often ignores the wrongdoings of men she likes. The internet is full of articles and video essays exploring this, so if you're curious, just go check them out. And you just can check her Twitter account and see it yourself if she hasn't deleted most of her problematic tweets. And before you go to check her Twitter account, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and let me know in the comments if you are or if you used to be a Harry Potter fan and if Joanne's views have affected your relationship with the books and the movies. I will read some of your comments at the end of next episode, and at the end of this episode I will be reading some of your comments from previous episodes. I want to use this quick parentheses to shout out to my patrons. Thank you so much for your support. It means a lot to me. Moving on, and huge disclaimer, I am not minimizing the struggles of trans women. Trans women are the target of gender critical feminists, and they put trans lives in danger. Even if there's no connection between transphobia and racism, we still need to support trans people because trans rights are human rights. When talking about TERFs, aka gender critical feminists, we must focus on trans people. They are the ones who suffer the most because of gender critical feminists. And to reject such a hateful ideology is just basic human decency. And it is below the bare minimum of what we can do for our trans siblings. This video is just to explore why, coincidentally, TERFs feel so comfortable with white supremacists. And of course, there are Black and women of color who are gender critical feminists, and some, very few, anti-trans feminist groups say that they are against racism, even though in practice they either support racist politicians or just ignore those issues altogether. For example, a very famous gender critical organization, Women's Place UK, they see themselves as anti-racist, and they have a few non-white members who are just tokens to shield themselves from criticism. But, you know, they have worked with Poise, what's her name? How do you say her name? Posey Parker, whatever her name is. And I will talk about her in this episode. Refuse to see certain groups of cis women as women. But to this day, they have collaborated with Tory politicians, and they love to write for the British newspaper, The Telegraph. And for those of you who don't know what The Telegraph is, it is like a British conservative newspaper that has endorsed the Tories, the British Conservative Party, for almost 80 years. And they are famous for ignite transphobia, but also racism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, and misinformation about issues like climate change, refugees, and just the global south in general. So even though the Women's Place UK have publicly denounced Parker, they still collaborate and work with politicians and newspapers that are fundamentally racist and bigoted and xenophobic. So this episode is an analysis of why it seems like gender critical feminists are so quick to work with this far right and white supremacists. Like, this episode is not about the biology of gender in the same way that I don't need a PhD in astronomy to know that the earth is not flat. I don't need to be a scientist with a PhD to know that trans women are women. Now let's start talking about non-white women's bodies. Dominican feminist, scholar, and anthropologist Ochi Curiel explains the importance of understanding womanhood in the context of power relationships as well as cultural indicators. And I quote what she says about this. For their part, Afrofeminists also question the category since it assumes women as a homogeneous group without differentiating them in their context and their relationship with race, for example. They contribute significantly to the universalizing the concept of woman, even of women, when they are crossed by other power relations such as race and sexuality, showing in a concrete way that woman does not exist. That is also a Eurocentric myth. At the center of violence against women under a patriarchal society is the domination of women under specific roles and to be perceived as second-class citizens, whose existence is an extension of men's aspirations, wishes, and desires. For the patriarchy, all women are just property. But what about those women who have historically not been considered women because they're not cis white women? In colonialism, particularly the bodies of non-white women are also object of colonial conquest. In a white supremacist society, the same way the human default is a white person, the default of what a woman is a white cis woman. A lot of external indicators of femininity under our society are extremely white and Eurocentric, and this is not a coincidence. This is a consequence of hundreds of years of colonial and imperialist violence, ideology, and domination. It is not a coincidence that often women who don't fit into those standards are called derogatorily men. White supremacy dehumanizes non-white women in a very specific way, and each historical context has its own characteristics, but with universal methods. Extreme violence against the bodies of those who are outside of the boundaries of white womanhood, systemic and intellectual dehumanization, racism, domination, and erasure. This is something that, like, all women who have been subjected to colonial violence share. Under this white supremacist worldview, people feel entitled to question, dissect, and value the bodies of those women who don't fit into the definition of what a woman is according to the white cis heteropatriarchy. To see non-white women as non-women has always been a key part of colonialism. In fact, colonialism cannot exist if non-white women are considered women because it needs to socially legitimize the exploitation of non-white women. There is not only a clear separation of the races, but also within the male and females are clear separations. If black women are considered women, then white women cannot be women. Therefore, black women must be considered non-women in order for white womanhood to exist. And that also affects non-white women in general. And just a quick parenthesis, a while ago I did an episode where I talk about topics like race, ethnicity, things like that. It was just like a glossary of those terms, so go check it out. The link to that video is going to be included here in this episode's description. Now I need to issue a trigger warning because coming next I will be discussing topics like SA and grape. Grape is a tool of colonial violence. In her book, Ain't I a Woman?, Bell Hooks explains the extreme cruelty and violent process of not only stripping enslaved African people of their humanity, but also how it was a key part of the economic and social colonial hierarchy. Black women's bodies were subjected to insane amounts of exploitation, punishment, sexual violence, among other forms of abuse. And I will quote from the book right now. Many of the anti-black woman stereotypes originated during slavery. By forcing black female slaves to perform the same work tasks as black male slaves, white male patriarchs were contradicting their own sexist order that claimed woman to be inferior because she lacked physical prowess. An explanation had to be provided to explain why black women were able to perform tasks that were cited by patriarchs as jobs women were incapable of performing, to explain black females' ability to survive without the direct aid of a male and her ability to perform tasks that were culturally defined as male work. White males argued that black slave women were not real women, but were masculinized, subhuman creatures. White men perpetuated the notion that black women possess unusual masculine-like characteristics not common to the female species. To prove their point, they often forced black women to labor at difficult jobs while black slaves stood idle. This is like a very tough thing to talk about, to be honest. Enslaved black women were constantly beaten, worked as hard as enslaved black men, and on top of everything, they suffer insane amounts of rape and sexual violence, including breeding to birth more enslaved black people. It was an insanely brutal process, which level of cruelty our brains just cannot comprehend. Another quote from the book. A devaluation of black womanhood occurred as a result of the sexual exploitation of black women during slavery that has not altered in the course of hundreds of years. Like, even white abolitionists like Mary Boykins Chestnut wouldn't consider black women who were raped as victims or just as fellow women, but rather as degraded entities that were tempting white men. Long after the abolition of slavery, black women were still considered non-women to justify the racism, violence, and SA they constantly received. And remnants of that colonial and imperialist perspective on women, we still see it to this day, affecting not only black women, but also any group of women who are not considered white women. For my patrons only, I will be doing a quick review on the book Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks. Now I want to talk about, do TERFs care about white working class women? The reason why I want to talk about this topic is because while I was reading Bell Hooks' book to do this episode, I found a quote that was very, very interesting, and I felt that it was like an invitation to explore this topic further. I believe it can also resonate with white working class women, even when we talk about non-white women. Few, if any, white women liberationists are willing to acknowledge that the women's movement was concisely and deliberately structured to exclude black and other non-white women and to serve primarily the interest of middle and upper class college-educated white women seeking social equality with middle and upper class white men. Something that you need to understand about the TERF cinematic universe is that there is a hierarchy, and class analysis is important to understand it, meaning that almost all TERFs main ideological figures come from upper middle class, upper class, or rich families, and that they have a lot of social, political, intellectual, and financial capital. Hundreds and thousands of like TERF accounts that you see on the internet and their fan base, even though like their fan base is very diverse when it comes to like class and social capital and like even race, like at the top is the same type of women. Of course, not 100% of them have that background, but even those who don't have that background, they do have that aspiration and understand that to be a real woman, to be a real feminist, is also to fit into that box, as Bell Hooks explained in her book, and to behave in a certain way. That's why gender critical feminists and TERFs in general, they almost always neglect white working class women's struggles because they also don't see working class women as women. For example, British gender critical feminists always ignore the struggles of white working class and poor women because they also don't see them as women. I'm gonna go as far as saying that. And the reason why I believe this is because We saw it during the pandemic. For example, British Terfs were very busy harassing trans women and using all of their resources and privilege to advocate against them, while at the same time white cis poor women and their children were literally going hungry and experiencing a lot of domestic violence. And I have like a very personal theory of why this happens, and the reason why I believe personally, this is like own personal thoughts of why they don't care about white working class women and white poor women, is number one, because of their background and the lack of class consciousness and analysis. Like, they are incapable of seeing these women as women and the struggles that come with poverty and being a woman as patriarchal violence. Number two, almost all Terfs in their anti-trans quest work with politicians and political parties and newspapers that harm the white working class. For example, in the United Kingdom, they love to collaborate with the Tories, a party that is famously known for their extreme cuts in social services, the healthcare services, education, and housing. And I've mentioned some examples before in this episode. Number three, because of their privilege, they understand that they will not be affected by aggressive conservative policies. That's why some of them feel so comfortable working with anti-abortion groups, which I will mention later. And I'm gonna be honest now that we're in this part of the episode being a little more like personal. I am also scared of gender critical feminists because they are powerful. They have harnessed so much power due to different circumstances that, to be honest, I was reconsidering all of this part is gonna be allegedly. I am afraid because I need to be able to travel back to my country. Some of them in my country allegedly have serious political power and could do so much good in the Dominican Republic. To be honest, like they have. And the thing is, like, in the Dominican Republic, a lot of them have so much power, so much like political and social and economic power, and they can do so much good. Like, we have serious problems in the Dominican Republic, like domestic violence, some of the worst anti-abortion laws in the world. We have one of the highest teenage pregnancy rates in the whole of Latin America. A lot of social inequality that disproportionately affect Dominican women and girls, among other issues. They don't care about those issues. Of course they don't. They barely acknowledge that Haitian women and Dominico-Haitian women exist. Instead, these Dominican Terfs allegedly waste their time and resources ranting about one of the most disenfranchised groups of women in the whole world, trans women. Now let's talk about the far-right and gender-critical feminists working together. There are countless examples of the far-right working together with gender-critical feminist women rights advocates. It could take me hours just talking about those instances. I'm just gonna mention a few. Lidia Falcón, Spanish feminist and leader of the Partido Feminista de España, or Feminist Party of Spain, they have collaborated with the far-right ultra-nationalist Spanish party Vox in order to attack the trans community in Spain. We also have Kelly J. Nische Ken Minshul, better known as Posey Parker. How do you say her name? Posey? Okay, I'm just gonna call her Parker. I don't care. So if you don't know who she is, she's an infamous British gender-critical activist and leader of the British political party, the Party of Women. Nazis and the far right in general seem to love her, and there are a lot of instances of her accidentally collaborating with them. For example, she has collaborated with several white supremacist figures, including Jean-François Garipi. He is a French white supremacist who calls for a white ethno-state. Also, neo-Nazis often go to support Parker's rallies, like in Australia and New Zealand. She was also interviewed by the British far-right group Soldiers of Christ. And this one is extremely ironic, and I want you to hear very carefully. So, At the event Let Women Speak in Australia, they had Matthew Trihey, a member of the Australian far right, and a man opening the event. Also, Parker, she has praised Tommy Robinson in the gender critical podcast Feminist Current.
And tweets at the time, and they had pulled out 6 or 7, and one of them was sort of questioning some of the stuff about Tommy Robinson. Now, I say in the tweet, I think he probably is a racist and a yob. I think that's enough.
Who's Tony Robinson?
Tommy Robinson is...
Oh, Tommy Robinson,
yeah.
sorry.
So I think he is an opportunist, and I think there's probably some really awful things to say about him. However, that's my gut feeling. However, all the things that he is accused of, I have yet to see conclusive evidence. That doesn't mean that I don't think he probably is a racist yob. That means that I'm not willing to commit myself 100% to that. And I raised a question. I sort of said, according to the mainstream media, I'm a hateful bigot. So we have to ask questions of the narratives around people and who they serve. So this isn't saying that Robinson, he's such a bad thing, because his name is like, it is like, if you utter his name without saying how much you hate him, you are basically considered a supporter. So I just said, we're supposed to think this and this and this about Robinson, but people think this about me. So I think we need to question who it serves. Like, why is this insignificant man being given such significance? It doesn't make any sense. He's just like a mousy yob. I don't, why is he able to be blamed for loads of stuff going on? And I'm not saying that his supporters aren't awful as well. I was raising a question because the scales had fallen from my eyes about the left. I'm questioning everything. I want to know why we're supposed to think that.
Yeah, I don't so I just Googled Tommy Robinson because I wasn't sure who he was. So I guess he's involved in politics, and he's called a far right activist.
Yes.
In the UK. But yeah, I guess so. I don't know anything about him, so I can't speak to him. But I think that part of the problem is that we're often expected to take positions on people that we don't really know much about. So we're supposed to accept what we read on the internet. So, for example, if you were labeled a white supremacist, then we would have to hate you because you're a white supremacist without actually looking into those accusations or, asking you what you actually think about racism. And I find it really frustrating as well, because I would probably say something similar to you, that it is not that I don't believe that this person might be a white supremacist or a horrible person or a bigot or whatever, but I do want to know for myself, and I do want to explore people's views for myself before deciding to label them or write them off. And that's something that is really unacceptable to a lot of leftist activists these days.
The thing with Tommy Robinson, the reason he is even of any note, is whilst everybody, and I'm sure there was, and in fact I'm assured by women on the ground, there was some work going on the ground in places like Rotherham and Telford, and everywhere that grooming gangs existed. There were women fighting it, right? However, it didn't make it to the mainstream media until massive, great big ruptures. And so what that did, and there was a culture of let's not be racist, so when these girls are losers, and they probably want to be prostitutes at 15. So all of those things tied in together left a gaping hole for somebody to come in and say, well, 90% of all the men that are grooming, that we've arrested for grooming, are Pakistani or Muslim or Somali, but they're all Muslim. So let's talk about Muslim grooming gangs. And that if you can't talk about these things, you leave them open for people with ill motives to talk about them and make it their cause. And that's exactly what happened. So I've just continued to sort of say, well, it's the fault of the left. if that police force had dealt with those gangs from the off, there would be no room for anybody to capitalise on that void. I was apparently Islamophobic because I said I didn't think little girls at 7 should be wearing hijabs. You know, and I can't imagine a feminist position that doesn't think little girls being told to cover their damn hair, and the thinking behind that is that hair is something that you should keep covered and it's part of being modest and it's a sexual thing. So therefore, if you cover little girls, you're basically saying that they're sexual.
Parker, she has ties with the Heritage Foundation.
I'll just tell you where I am right now. So I'm at the Heritage Foundation. And the only people that will put an event like this on is the Heritage Foundation. And I don't really want to address any of the other stuff about this organisation. So I will continue to reach hands across the aisle. And frankly, if you don't like that, I don't care.
If you don't know what's the Heritage Foundation, I will give you a super summarized definition of what it is. And it is important that you know who they are because I'm going to mention them in this episode a few times. So the Heritage Foundation is an American conservative think tank that pushes right-wing policies. Let me know in the comments if you knew who they were. Another example of gender critical feminists, aka TERFs, working with the far right. We also have the Women's Liberation Front, which is a radical feminist organization in the US that focuses on fighting against transgender rights. They have collaborated with right-wing groups including the Heritage Foundation, Family Research Council, which is an evangelical Christian think tank, and in 2016 they received $15,000 from the Alliance Defending Freedom. The Alliance Defending Freedom, they are an American conservative Christian legal advocacy group, and one of their main goals is to completely outlaw abortion, not only in the United States, but they are also behind anti-abortion movements outside of the United States, like here in Europe. And also the other conservative groups that I've mentioned, they're very anti-abortion and anti-reproductive rights. A while ago, I did like a TikTok video where I talk a little about the connection between that Alliance Defending Freedom group and abortion rights here in Sweden. So I'm going to insert it right here so you can go check it out.
Quick warning for those in Europe seeing what's happening in the United States and congratulating themselves that it is not happening in their country.
Back in 2014, a midwife was fired in Sweden from her job because she refused to provide abortions due to her Christian beliefs. And when she decided to take her case to Swedish courts, they failed against her because they said, no, you weren't discriminated against. You were refusing healthcare to someone. Keep in mind that in Sweden, abortion is provided by the healthcare system. So when she took her case to the Swedish courts, she was supported by an American Christian legal organization, not just any Christian organization. She was supported by the Alliance Defending Freedom. So this organization is huge, and you can pause here to read. But why would like a big Christian organization in the US would want to support a midwife in a country like Sweden? Keep in mind, in Sweden, abortion rights is not a big of a debate, and the general consensus is very much pro-choice. However, in Sweden, there are Christian groups like the ones you have in the US and American Christian groups here in Sweden that they even have their churches, even though they're not as big as in other countries. In an opinion piece for The Guardian, feminist activist Judith Butler explains this very well. Judith Butler explains the connection between gender critical feminism, aka TERFs, and fascism. And I will quote the following. As a fascist trend, the anti-gender movement supports even strengthening forms of authoritarianism. Its tactics encourage state powers to intervene in university programs, to censor art and television programming, to forbid trans people their legal rights, to ban LGBTQI people from public spaces, to undermine reproductive freedom, and the struggle against violence directed at women, children, and LGBTQI people. It threatens violence against those, including migrants, who have become cast as demonic forces and whose suppression or expulsion promises to restore a national order under duress. And once you think about it, it makes total sense why the far right feels so comfortable working with TERFs, aka gender critical feminists, and it's because they're not a threat to the patriarchy. On the contrary, these TERFs help reinforce the patriarchy. Patriarchy is key in white supremacy, and at the center is the subjugation of white women to fulfill very specific roles. TERFs are the good women. They're the good ones. They're the ones who are selling the agency of all women because they're too racist and transphobic. They don't care for liberation. They want supremacy. Now let's talk about the contract between white supremacist men and gender critical feminists. It is so easy for them to collaborate with right-wing and far-right groups because they share common goals and have similar ideological perspectives. For me, and this is my personal opinion, I believe TERFs are part of the far-right universe. No matter how much they try to deny it, no matter how many social media posts they do denouncing racism, they are part of that universe. TERFs believe that if a group has rights, they will have fewer rights. And they also believe the insane conspiracy theory of replacement. People just don't see it as clearly because they play the "we are just weak women who care about women's safety." They use that card, and also transphobia is so extremely normalized that people just see it as a win-win. Gender critical feminists are racist in the first place. They never gave themselves the opportunity to explore their own racism, so it is natural for them to just see white supremacy as a natural means to an end. And because of it, they just see it as a natural progression. Gender critical feminists, aka TERFs, are not just a bunch of crazy women. They are an organized political front, and they know what they're doing. They know that these right-wing men will help them get the job done. It was never about women's safety. That's just an excuse to just justify the most dangerous ideologies. They don't care about children. They don't care about women. And on that same note about weaponizing groups' struggles for another end, TERFs, aka gender critical feminists, they love to weaponize the struggles of women from the global south. They will talk about domestic violence in the Dominican Republic being one of the highest in Latin America, while at the same time working with politicians that want to deport Dominican women. They will talk about female genital mutilation in Somalia and the extreme hell that Afghani women live under the Taliban regime, while at the same time working with politicians and newspapers that dehumanize these women and want to see them deported when they come to seek refuge. Gender critical feminists, they have so much power and they could do so much good for the women they said to care about. But in reality, they just use the experiences of Iranian, Afghani, Somali, and Dominican women to justify their aggressive transphobic white supremacist quest. They don't identify systemic racist violence against women of color as sexist patriarchal violence because they have those white supremacist ideas in the first place, and they see that imperialist colonial violence as a civilizing force for us. No matter how many black women who are gender critical feminists you show me, it doesn't matter how many POC women are marching with these TERFs and talking at their events and working with them. It's just tokenism. The systemic reality is that they don't see us cis black and POC women as the same type of women as they are. And this is not reflected on what they say. It is reflected in their actions. It's reflected in who they collaborate with. The language of scientific racism is the same as the language of scientific misogyny. And if you use both languages to justify your gender critical views, you are by default reinforcing not only patriarchal structures, but also racist structures. And to reinforce them, an insane amount of systemic violence is needed. And the structures and systemic bigotry are already in place. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this episode. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think gender critical feminists, white supremacy? Why not? I will be reading some of your comments at the end of each episode from now on. And now I'm gonna read some comments that you guys posted on previous episodes. I'm gonna go check them out now. Hello, I'm going to be reading now some of your comments. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for watching and listening and subscribing. Before I start reading your comments, I just want to mention something amazing that happened to me. One of my favorite YouTubers of all times shared one of my episodes on his social media, well, on his YouTube channel. And I'm like, oh my God, FD Signifier. I love his content. Yeah, he shared my video that I did about the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I just want to thank everybody who came to watch that video. Thank you so much for your comments. There are so many comments, and I'm just gonna show some of those comments here. A lot of extremely supportive comments. I put a lot of love and effort into it. Of course, I am not Congolese and I don't know anything. There's a lot of things that I could have touched and I'm hoping to do, especially the connection between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Sweden. But that being said, oh my God, thank you so much for your comments. Greetings. I got greetings from so many countries, from Norway, from Congo, from the US. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna read some comments. Came here from FD Signifier. I read Cobalt Red recently and it was so eye-opening. Your video has added a lot of additional insight to Kara's book. Thank you for your work. Oh my God, thank you so much. Yeah, I read the book entirely. I strongly recommend that book. It's not perfect in my personal opinion. I think he is not very good at explaining the colonial and imperialist context. He's really good at mentioning names, mentioning how the process works, but I don't think it should be the only book that you should read. As I mentioned in my video, and I'm going to mention it again, I strongly recommend that you read the book of Georges Nonsola Talaya that he did about Patrice Lumumba. I knew some of this, but not the entire picture. Thank you for sharing this important story. Commenting for the algo and to thank you for the in-depth analysis of geopolitical situation that isn't talked about enough, and I want to learn more. People like you are willing to do the work of teaching people is crucial, and I can't appreciate it enough, but I hope taking my time and effort to learn can at least be a good start. Right now in Canada, we are observing Truth and Reconciliation and Observance, where focus is put on being open about Canada's historical and ongoing genocidal actions of Indigenous people and trying to learn more about the actions of my country, both here and abroad. And I was informed that we have a lot of the mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm only 30 seconds in, so I don't know the content of the video, but I'm commenting for engagement and to say that I find your voice exceedingly charming. Oh my God, thank you so much. Thank you. And I'm also gonna read a few comments of my latest episode that I did. Great video. Thanks for posting. Down with colonialism and fascism. Thank you so much for that amazing, beautiful comment. Excellent video. It's good to see that Sweden is so accepting of pride, at least in the cities, but it's also extremely important to understand how immigration and extremism can interplay with LGBTQ safety and how modern politics intersect with queer rights and the other important thing you brought up in the video. I hope that you guys continue to fight the good fight and push for your freedom to express yourselves and your values, even when it's convenient to the state, like what seems to be happening with the Queer Against Fascism Palestine thing. It's pretty sickening that officials who would essentially execute someone for being queer get to be in pride. May as well try to end my comment on a more positive note, though. This video managed to reach to me, so it is probably gonna keep gaining views, allowing the message to spread further, and I'm sharing this with my friends to share the message also. I hope that we can push this message out to more and more people. Thank you so much for your comment. And something that I forgot to mention on that episode, the only people who were protesting and the only people who keep protesting against pride are Christians. And Swedish Nazis, they go every year to protest. No notes, just engagement to hopefully boost. Thank you so much for your comments. I will be reading more on next episode. Don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to follow and share this episode. I'm also on TikTok, Instagram, and most podcast platforms. I want to once again thank my patrons. Thank you so much for your support. Once again, thank you so much for watching this episode, and see you next time.